And this is tape 24. And what we're going to be talking about today are some principles in the Constitution, some ideas, federalism, confederalism, stuff like that. So there's just a series of these bullet points just have to make to help you understand the Constitution. The first one is actually a really important thing. Okay? Not that everything else I talk about isn't important, but this is pretty important. Okay. Remember the Articles of Confederation? Confederation. What's a confederation? A confederation is very simple. In a confederation, the people, we the people, give power to the states. And the states then give power to the national government. Okay? So, people give power to the states. That's how these things all start. Then the states decide how much power they want to give to the national government. Now, remember in an earlier tape we were talking about the Articles of Confederation and the weakness of it. The states did not give power to the national government to raise taxes. So the national government had no money. And because the national government had no money, it couldn't raise an army. So when there was a rebellion that erupted in western Massachusetts, the national government couldn't deal with it because it had no money and no army. Okay? So the Confederation principle has its limits. It gives power to the states and then to the national government. And it didn't work in the case of the Articles of Confederation. So, instead of a confederation, the U.S. Constitution set up erase this right here. A federation or a federal system. And what is that? I'll show you. The people again give power to the states, okay? And the people give power to the national government. So the national government derives its power from the people, not from the states. The whole idea is that the states and the national government are different entities, each of which exists because the people say so. So this is a whole different concept of government. This federal system, this federation, was what the Constitution created. And because it created it, the American experience is simply a test of whether this works. And it turns out it's working pretty good. Okay? Now, think about something. The Civil War, the southern states broke away from the federal system, and they created a confederation, a confederacy. So because they created that, lo and behold, they had the same problem as the Articles of Confederation, which was there wasn't money coming from the states. The states refused to give money to the national government, and the states also refused to give money and refused to send troops to the national government. Jefferson Davis, the president of the Southern Confederacy, of the Confederate States, he spent much of his time begging the states in the Confederacy to send him troops. Texas, for one, refused to send him a lot of troops. Texas was so concerned about the Native American tribes, especially the Comanche tribes, but also the Cherokee. It was so concerned about them that they wanted to keep the troops in Texas rather than fight against the North. They wanted to protect the people who were there against the native Indian tribes. So that is a confederacy, a confederation. In a federation, because the national government has its own powers, well, the federal government, the national government, can do its own things and doesn't need to go through the states. So this is a basic principle of the U.S. Constitution. Let's do another one. There's just a couple that are deserving of our attention. The next one is one of my favorites, and you think this is silly, but in fact, it's actually really important. Calendar elections. Calendar elections. Forgive me for not having enough room up there. Okay, calendar elections. What do I mean by that? Our elections are actually set up by the calendar. Okay, we know on the first Tuesday after the first Monday, every 4 years, years that are leap years, we're going to have an election for president. Okay? That's what the calendar says. And you go, what's the big deal? Well, what it does is it leaves power for elections in the hands of institutions. Remember that word? The rule of law. And power is not in the hands of men, of humans, of your rulers. It turns out that most countries don't do this. Most countries instead don't have the system that we have. They instead create a parliamentary system. And in a typical parliamentary system, you can think of Canada, you can think of Mexico, Canada, you think of Great Britain as models of this. What happens is very simple. The prime minister gets elected, and then they serve for a term of 5 years. But they can call an election to get reelected anytime they want to. So what do? They call for re-elections when their popularity is really high. They do not call for re-elections when their popularity is really low. So they, in fact, set the term for their own re-election. Here in the United States, and we've talked about this before, here in the United States, we know when people's terms are up. You serve as president 4 years. You have to get re-elected to serve any more than that. You serve in Congress, the House of Representatives, 2 years. You have to go before the voters if you're going to serve again. All because of calendar elections. Our election in 2020, November 3rd, 2020. Why? Because that's what the calendar says. The first Tuesday after the first Monday of November. Calendar elections. Takes power out of the hands of politicians and puts the power into an institution, the calendar. Okay? All right. One other important thing to know is this concept. Judicial review. Judicial review. And what is judicial review? Judicial review is simply the power of the Supreme Court to determine if something is constitutional or not. Okay? And you go, that seems pretty basic. Supreme Court has the power to determine if something is constitutional or not. And you're absolutely correct. It has that power. But where did it get it? If you read the U.S. Constitution, you're going to discover it's not in the Constitution. It's just not there. Okay? It's gone. So, where'd they get the power from? It turns out they got the power from a case called Marbury versus Madison. Okay? Madison, of course, James Madison, the President of the United States. What was he? The 5th President of the United States, I think. And what happened was, by the way, the date of this case I need to write down, 1803. At the time, James Madison was not the President of the United States. He was Secretary of State. And the case was pretty simple. Marbury wanted a job. Madison didn't want to give him the job. Marbury sued. Case went to the Supreme Court. Okay, not a big deal, the facts of the case or anything like that. What is important to know is this, that in deciding the case, the Supreme Court said, we, the Supreme Court, have the power to determine if a law is constitutional or not. That wasn't in the Constitution. The Supreme Court simply said, we've got it. It's a power grab. We've got it. It's ours. Where did they get that from? They just made it up. Okay. And now we assume it's the normal power of the Supreme Court. But it actually came about with Marbury versus Madison. The Chief Justice at the time realized that the Supreme Court needed to have a job. It needed to do something important. And what it determined was important was having the ability to determine if something is constitutional or not. That power to determine constitutionality is called judicial review. Okay? So, what we've done then is we've gone through 3 different parts, key parts, principles of the Constitution: federalism, calendar elections, and judicial review. All right? One more tape after this one, and that is going to be on states. Okay? We'll get to that in a second.